What is up, everybody? Hey, welcome to our Reflections podcast. My name is Ryan, and I'm in studio here with Olivia. What up, Olivia? You know, when I grew up in the church, and one of the phrases that we would often say or hear, and I didn't really quite understand it, but it sort of like induced this level of fear in me that was always, I could almost feel it. Maybe you heard this phrase, or if you didn't grow up in the church, maybe you didn't, and fine. But it was a phrase of generational curses. And the idea was that we thought that, like, you know, these curses were kind of passed down from one generation to another. And so, like, if you were the grandson of a grandfather who had, like, engaged in these sinful activities or addictions or whatever, like a curse would be passed down. And so we call these generational curses. It's like some of the most fear-producing language in Christianity, if you ask me. Now, the Bible does talk about things like this. Here's what I want to say about it. I want to just sort of unpack it a bit and maybe offer a different angle on what it might mean when people say, or when the Bible talks about what you might call generational curses. And here's a different way to think about it. So, because the question I think is raised, like, am I the victim of, like, my grandfather or great-grandfather's actions? And, like, is that how it works, or is there something else going on there? But the Bible does talk about, in a number of places, and mostly in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament, like Exodus, Deuteronomy. There's a couple places in those books where it says something like God will punish the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generations. You can Google it, but there's all these verses in Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy. It's the law that it seems like it says God will punish the sins of or punish the children for the sins of the father. So yeah, verses like Exodus 20 verse 5, or Exodus 34 verse 7, or Numbers 14 verse 18, and Deuteronomy, as I mentioned, 5 verse 9. And so it's this idea that God seemingly is punishing the children for the sin of the parents up to the third and fourth generations. Now, if you ask me, like, this sounds like, is God punishing the kids for their parents' sins? Am I culpable or responsible for my parents or their parents' sins? Like, is that what generational curses means? That the following generations are cursed and doomed because of the sins of their grandparents. And is it like some kind of a magical curse passed down, like a spell, or something like genetic maybe even? Or is it something maybe, I don't know, more ordinary, which is maybe even more dangerous? So, you know, in the modern world, we have this understanding of, like, patterns of, like, psychological patterns and systems of behavior and learned behaviors and trauma and addiction. And here's what I mean. So I grew up the son of divorced parents. They got divorced when I was about 6 years old. And my father, my birth father, had anger issues, addiction problems. My mom came from, you know, this was her second abusive husband that she married, and had dated lots of other abusive people before this. And if you look back in their lives, in their sort of family tree, you see their ancestors, or like their parents or uncles, that have these same kinds of problems. And, like, for me too, like, when I grew up, I struggled immensely with anger and some addictive kinds of behaviors and things like my father. And you're like, wow, what is this is weird. Is it that, like, I'm cursed with some magical spell? Or is it maybe that, like, I was raised by a person who didn't know any better, and he sort of passed along those behaviors, and I learned them because the water I swam in for a number of my formative years, and because of my own trauma and sort of the you know, failure to recognize the elephants in the room in our lives. And not until I got into therapy when I was in my teens that I really realized, oh, this is, like, not properly how one should live. And I have a good friend of mine who I met him when he was in middle school. And his mom was raising him. His dad had left him when he was a little boy. He never knew his dad. And his mom had all kinds of bizarre, deviant sorts of behaviors, and was terrible with money, and just generally irresponsible. And we loved the young man. He would come to a lot of our youth programming. We loved him. And but he was growing up, and he also began to take on these same kinds of traits. He began to kind of engage in sort of these out-of-bounds behaviors in terms of relationships with girls, and he was doing things with money that he didn't, you know, he just was really inappropriate, irresponsible with it. And I was like, oh, yeah, because nobody has shown him or taught him any differently. I was with a couple, I was counseling them, and they're an older couple, and they're kind of facing the end of their days here. They both know that they're at the end of their life, and they've got all kinds of wounds with their children that they've passed on, and they have, like, a rupture in the relationships. Like, the father especially has had a falling out with every one of his kids, and all of his kids have told him, we don't want to even talk to you any longer, and he's going to die very soon, and so is she. And I broke my heart. And then I asked him, I'm like, what's going on there? And he told me, I'm just so angry at my mom. I was like, you're angry at your mom for how you were raised, and so now you're being this certain way with your kids, a way that actually makes them not want to talk to you any longer? And it's like, I'm shocked. And I'm like, yeah, it's sort of this, like, no wonder they're like this. No wonder there's this rupture, because you guys were taught the very same things that your parents were taught, that their parents were taught. And so I don't know if it's like a generational curse, meaning like a magical spell passed down, as much as it is like these patterns of behavior that we learned from our parents, who learned it from their parents, who learned from their parents. And the more I do this, the more I'm convinced that like children just do what they're shown a lot of times. And maybe it's just more about that learned behavior. Like, I'm not surprised to learn that you don't know how to manage money because your parents never showed you. You know what I mean? I'm not surprised that you have anger issues, that you're an angry abuser, probably because you were a victim of an angry abuser. You know, I'm not surprised to hear that. You use like racist slurs or racial slurs when I hear your parents use them and their parents use them. It's like the things that our parents did and their parents did often are things that we end up doing. So I don't know, maybe the text in these verses in Exodus and in Numbers and Deuteronomy is not sort of describing a spell passed down, but like a trajectory that repeats itself over and over again from one generation to the next, unless it's interrupted. Now, Ezekiel comes along. Ezekiel is written after these two books of the law, or three, Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Ezekiel, the prophet, says this. And by the way, he's not correcting, or he's not overriding what those verses say. I think he's actually bringing kind of a correction or clarification. So he says this: "Hey, the one who sins is the one who will die." Now, maybe it's a physical death, but maybe it's more of like just all kinds of like death. I mean, sin equals death is sort of this common theme in the scripture. Sin breeds death in every way. But he says, so the one who sins is the one who will die. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. So Ezekiel comes along, he says something wildly different. He kind of corrects the thoughts of the earlier Israelites. Israel was sort of saying, hey, we're stuck because of our parents and these generational things passed on. We have no other way of being. And in Ezekiel, God seems to say, no. You're responsible for your own life. Yes, you were raised in these certain ways. And yes, it sometimes puts you behind the 8 ball. And yes, maybe you're starting at -1 or a half a mile behind the starting line. Yeah, for sure. But like, there is a way forward. The Bible refuses, I think, to let us blame our ancestors forever. And so when the people say that they're cursed because of their parents, or when we say that and use that language, like, we're not really promoting or producing healing. We're sort of producing fatalism or even shame. So yeah, here's what I would say. I think this idea of generational curses is less about some kind of magical spell and more like, hey, we are all learning life from those around us in our community, our parents and their parents. And these things do get passed down. It is like learned behavior and systems of, behavior patterns and these kinds of things that are hard sometimes to recognize when you're in them. But they're not impossible to overcome. We're not simply, the victims of the fates that will sort of have laid a course for us that we just follow. But it is important to ask, and here's what I want to ask you in closing here. What patterns have you inherited? As a young adult, as an older adult, what are the things that how are you living that were similar to how your parents were living and their parents? Maybe patterns of dysfunction or abuse or, I don't know, silence or whatever the things are that are unhealthy. And then I want to ask you this: which ones will end with you? Yeah, which ones will you break? Which ones will you where will you decide at the fork in the road? Like, I'm going to go this way instead. I'm going to be the first one in my family to not do that. I'm going to be the first one in this generation to not go that road because it's destructive and leads to death. I'm going to go a different direction. And where might grace be more powerful than your past? So my prayer for you today is that you will recognize the systems that you've inherited, the ways of behavior, that you will see them for what they are, and that you will go a different route today. All right, love you guys. Peace. Hey, if you enjoy this show, I'd love to have you share it with some friends. And don't forget, you are always welcome to join us in person at Central in Elk River at 8:30, which is our liturgical gathering, or at 10 o'clock, our modern gathering. Or you can check us out online at clcelkriver.org. Peace.